Good morning, friends. Today we return to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 4, where we read, "For it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins." We mentioned this verse both in last Lord's Day sermon, as well as yesterday's devotion, where we briefly asked, why in the world would they keep making these sacrifices if they didn't work? Well, the author of Hebrews provides a clear, helpful answer, which we can read if we just back up a few verses to the beginning of the chapter. Because in verse 1, we read, "For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come, instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near." And in verse 3, "But in these sacrifices there is a reminder of sins every year." Here we see one of the big themes of the book of Hebrews, that the old covenant was but a shadow of the reality of the new covenant. And this is a huge reason as to why Jesus is superior in all those various ways we've already talked about, because the real thing is always going to be superior to the shadow of the real thing. But we must remember that when it comes to the relationship between the old covenant and the new, even though the old covenant was a shadow, it was still there for a very important reason and purpose. First, as verse 3 explicitly states, those animal sacrifices, even though they couldn't actually take away the guilt of sin, were a reminder of the reality of sin's existence and its dreadful cost. Because just think about all the sacrifices offered in the nation of Israel. This chapter of Hebrews predominantly has the once a year Day of Atonement sacrifices in mind, but there were animal sacrifices being held daily all the rest of the year as well. And it's not my purpose to be gross and all that, but that is a lot of death. It's a lot of killing, and it's a lot of blood. Being a priest of the Most High God in the Old Covenant would not have been a pleasant thing from a purely earthly standpoint. You were constantly killing things, constantly getting your hands bloody. And part of the sacrificial law was taking the blood of the animals and splattering it on the rest of the altar, on certain objects within the temple itself, and so on, such that there was blood everywhere. Everywhere you looked, you would have seen blood. And that is a reminder of the consequences of sin, that the wages of sin is death. And God set that system up, among other reasons that we've talked about, to serve as a day in, day out reminder of just how costly sin was and is. And that if we tried to pay the price ourselves by the means available to us, it would never end. We can't pay an infinite price with finite lives. It was just sacrifice after sacrifice, no end in sight. Get up the next day and do the same thing again, time and time again, year in, year out. One priest dies, the next one starts doing the same thing again. But that is why the superiority of Christ was so important, because he could do what we never could. And in addition to being a reminder of sin, we're told that the law was but a shadow of the good things to come instead of the true form of these realities. There's the specific concept of shadow versus reality again, but inherent in that shadow is the ability to see something of the reality. In that way, these day in, day out sacrifices not only point to the severity of sin, but they point to the need for the real thing to come and to finally deal with that sin once for all. The shadow couldn't do it. We needed the full reality to come. In this way, the animal sacrifices, as well as those old covenant priests and what they did, prefigured the work of Christ and what he would do once for all. They were a shadow of his ultimate good work. And so for this reason, we understand that the Old Testament believer was saved not by those animal sacrifices, but by faith in the coming Messiah, to whom those animal sacrifices pointed. And so even though the blood of bulls and goats was completely ineffective at taking away sins, there were those two incredibly important reasons why God commanded the people to do them anyway. First, they taught the people the drastic consequences of sin and that they could never actually deal with those consequences themselves. And secondly, as a shadow of the coming reality, they pointed the people to the one who would be able to deal with those sins. And there's application in there for you and me. The simple fact, and for the world today, the simple fact that we might try anything possible to deal with our sin or to enlighten ourselves or to find the way to happiness or to find our way to enlightenment or nirvana or just to find a way to get God to accept us for who we are. But friends, just like that Old Testament system, it's not going to happen. We need Christ. He's the only one that can deal with the issue. He's the only one that can deal with sin once for all. Have a good and godly day, my friends. And if the Lord wills, I will see you tomorrow.